Imagine for a moment that a mad scientist forces you into a time machine and demands you pick a random period to travel to. Now, you might think the Jurassic period is a safe bet, right? Think again. If you pick 150 million years ago, you're in for a world of trouble. This wasn't just another chapter in dinosaur history. It was a time when danger lurked around every corner, and death was more instant than you'd ever want to imagine. Sure, dinosaurs dominated the land, but the ones roaming around back then weren't your average creatures. They were absolute giants, and many paleontologists consider this period the golden age of massive, meat-hungry predators. But even if you could snap your fingers and make the dinosaurs disappear, 150 million years ago would still be the last place you want to be, with oceans, skies, and land teeming with life forms that were absolutely unforgiving to anything that didn't belong. Welcome to the late Jurassic. Imagine standing on Earth 150 million years ago, and not even a map could help you. The continents looked so different that you wouldn't recognize them at all. North America was the closest to what we know today, though it still had a few changes, but that's where the familiar ends. South of there was a massive landmass, the last supercontinent, Gondwana. This giant landmass consisted of South America, the Arabian Peninsula, India, Antarctica, and Australia, covering almost 1/6 of the entire Earth's surface. From space, it would have looked like a colossal blob of land. However, Gondwana wasn't the most alien-looking landmass of the time. That honor went to Laesia, a huge continent made up of present-day Europe, Greenland, and parts of Asia. Unlike the rest of the planet, Laesia was nearly entirely covered by vast waters, splitting the land into numerous islands and creating the diverse geography we know today. Europe, for example, was an island paradise, far closer to North America than it is now, while China was next to Iran and Turkey, far from India. The world back then? Geographically confusing, to say the least. But at least oceanography during the late Jurassic was simpler, with only two major bodies of water, the Pacific and the Taos Ocean. The Taos was an ancient ocean, having existed for over 100 million years. It covered the Eastern Hemisphere and had recently gone through tectonic activity, raising sea levels and submerging large portions of Laesia. Even with that boost, it was still smaller than the Pacific Ocean, which had already become the dominant ocean of the Western Hemisphere and was expanding rapidly. As if things weren't already complicated enough, there was the emergence of yet another body of water that we all know today as the Atlantic Ocean. However, back then, it was more like a sea than anything else, surrounded almost entirely by land. What makes this even more surprising is that the temperatures in the Atlantic weren't anything like what we experience now. The water was remarkably warmer, and this wasn't just a fluke for one part of the ocean. This was a trend that spanned the entire globe. Sea temperatures during the late Jurassic averaged around 32.1 degrees or 90 degrees Celsius, 25% hotter than the current average. Even the deepest parts of the Pacific weren't much cooler, hovering around 17 degrees or 63 degrees, basically the same temperature as tap water. This heightened warmth was an anomaly that not only affected sea life, but also had a ripple effect on the entire climate of the time. Imagine a world where the oceans felt like a hot bath, and the seas were far more dangerous and unpredictable than the cold, deep waters we know today. The cause of all this extra heat can be traced back to the increased tectonic activity of the time, which led to highly active volcanoes, spewing massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. And believe it or not, paleontologists actually know of some of these extinct volcanoes. One of them is Earth's largest known volcano, Tamu Massif. This colossal titan sits 1,600 kilometers, 990 miles, east of Japan, and spans more seafloor than the entire state of California. To put it into perspective, it stands nearly twice as tall as Mount St. Helens. When it was active, Tamu Massif had a profound impact on Earth's environment. Its eruptions would have made the oceans more acidic, while also heating up the atmosphere. This, in turn, would have led to warmer conditions on land, creating an even more hostile environment for any life forms trying to survive. In fact, 150 million years ago was likely the hottest period in the entire Jurassic, with an average daily temperature of 20 degrees, 68 degrees, nearly 15% warmer than what we experience today. With all this heat, Earth was experiencing climatic conditions it hadn't seen in nearly 50 million years. Both the northern and southern hemispheres were home to vast dry biomes, including deserts and savannas. These areas were tough for animals to live in, especially considering the distinct dry seasons, where severe droughts were not uncommon. But towards the equator, things became a bit more forgiving. Drier ecosystems gave way to lush tropical forests that covered much of North Africa. However, the most temperate conditions weren't found in these tropical zones. Instead, they were located closer to the polar regions, which were much warmer back then. These areas weren't the brutal, freezing tundras we think of today, but rather temperate biomes, much like modern-day Central Europe. The polar regions were so warm that they didn't even have ice sheets or glaciers, allowing life to flourish in ways we wouldn't expect today. Even in the harshest, driest climates closer to the equator, life still found a way. In fact, some of the richest known formations hail from these brutal areas. Dinosaurs in particular thrived and experienced an incredible level of diversification that had never been seen before. Of all the groups lumbering around, theropods, sauropods, neornithines, and armored dinosaurs were the most established. Multiple species from each group often coexisted within a single ecosystem, leading to a chaotic environment rarely seen during the Mesozoic era. This is perhaps best exemplified by the Morrison Formation, a vast North American biosphere spanning across 13 states. It was composed of arid savannas, dense forests, and wetlands. So far, over 40 species of dinosaurs have been found there, including at least 10 different theropods. Nearly all of these theropods were big enough to hunt animals the size of humans, making it a land teeming with giant predators. Unlike the Cretaceous, where tyrannosaurs ruled the land, the Morrison Formation's most dominant carnivores weren't T-Rexes. Those hadn't evolved yet. Instead, the most abundant predator of the time was the Allosaurus. Often called the Lion of the Jurassic, this terrifying creature was a nearly unstoppable hunter. With razor-sharp teeth and a blood-spilling, slashing bite, the Allosaurus could take down a wide variety of herbivores. Some studies even suggest that it may have hunted in packs, making it an even more formidable threat. Whatever the case, it undeniably dominated the land, with Allosaurus remains accounting for 75% of all carnivorous dinosaur fossils in the Morrison Formation. Given these numbers, you'd expect it to be a small, common creature, but that was far from the truth. The Allosaurus was a giant by modern standards, with adults averaging 1.7 tons in weight and reaching up to 5 meters, 28 feet in length. This comfortably made it one of the top predators of its time. While the Allosaurus was undoubtedly one of the biggest predators around, remarkably, it wasn't the largest terrestrial predator on Earth. That title actually goes to the Sarcophagus, which also lived in North America. Like the Allosaurus, the Sarcophagus was a member of the Allosaur family. But this beast could weigh up to 5 tons, equivalent to nearly 4 adult giraffes. In terms of classification, it resembled the Allosaurus in many ways, with its robust arms, sharp claws, serrated teeth, and distinct crests. However, the Sarcophagus differed in the shape of its vertebrae and, of course, its massive body size. And the Sarcophagus wasn't the only giant predator in the Morrison Formation. There were others, like the Catosaurus, Torvosaurus, and the mysterious EDM Merar Rex. Both Torvosaurus and EDM Merar Rex were megalosaurs and just as massive. Large specimens of Torvosaurus weighed around 4 tons, while the EDM Merar Rex might have weighed just as much as the Sarcophagus. These giants roamed the land, competing for dominance as the apex predators of their time. On the other hand, Catosaurus, while ferocious, was a major step down from the giant carnivores mentioned earlier. Large adults of this species were about the size of a polar bear, so still not small by any means. Despite its size, many consider it the underdog of the Jurassic, often overlooking its agility and powerful bite, which made it a highly successful predator. What people often forget, though, is that giant predators were the exception, not the rule. Most of the predators in the Morrison Formation were medium-sized, like the Catosaurus, or even smaller. For example, early primitive relatives of the Tyrannosaurus made up the bulk of these carnivores, often standing no taller than a human beast. This raises an interesting question. How did these smaller predators manage to survive in such a competitive environment? So, how did such small carnivores stand a chance in an ecosystem ruled by behemoths? The answer is simple: niching. Instead of directly competing with each other, predators occupied different ecological niches. This is clearly shown by the relationship between the Catosaurus and the Allosaurus. The Catosaurus was found near bodies of water, while the Allosaurus preferred open terrestrial spaces. This strategy helped keep the peace in a rich environment, allowing various species to thrive without directly stepping on each other's toes. Peace wasn't always possible. North America, and much of Earth, were often subjected to severe droughts that drove nearly every predator to violence. Fossilized remains indicate extreme levels of cannibalism, theropod and non-theropod violence, and scavenging. It was during these desperate times that being smaller actually became an advantage. Why? Because it meant that far fewer calories were needed to survive. This, of course, applied to the smaller predators like the Catosaurus and others in the ecosystem. Small herbivores are also part of the ecosystem, mostly made up of neornithines. Over 5 different kinds are known from 150 million years ago. Among the more common ones were the Dryosaurus, which was about the size of a cougar, and the larger Camptosaurus, weighing about half a ton. Despite their size differences, both had similar diets, mainly consisting of ground-level plants. Unfortunately, these herbivores shared a major flaw, a complete lack of natural defenses. Speed was their only real defense, and it had to be their plan A, B, and C. But that, of course, only worked until predators came into the picture. However, not all herbivores were so defenseless. Many became ruthless in their own right to ward off theropods, like the iconic Stegosaurus. This massive creature was not only one of the largest non-sauropod dinosaurs you could find, but also a tough one to mess with. Adult Stegosaurus could reach up to 9 meters, 30 feet in length, and weigh up to 5.5 tons. But it wasn't just its size that made it intimidating. It also had a thagomizer, a term that may sound funny but would have been absolutely terrifying for any potential predator. This was a large set of bony spikes attached to the end of its tail, turning it into a lethal weapon. The Stegosaurus could use its tail to pierce the bones of attacking carnivores, as evidenced by fossils of one unlucky Allosaurus who learned that lesson the hard way. The Stegosaurus wasn't the only herbivore with a good defense in these lands. Enter Maimura, one of the oldest known ankylosaurs. It was considerably smaller than its later relatives, with adults weighing only 500 dikiki. 1,239 tubes. But despite its smaller size, it had the trademark heavy armor that made ankylosaurs so famous. Osteoderms, bony deposits, spread across the entirety of its upper body, varying in size and sometimes sporting sharp edges, especially near vulnerable spots. Unfortunately, armor alone wasn't enough to protect it. Numerous Maimura remains were found with signs of predation by theropods. This grim fate likely extended to other armored dinosaurs, including another ankylosaur called Gargoylosaurus and the Stegosaurus allosaurus. It seems that no matter how tough your armor was, survival in the age of giant predators wasn't always guaranteed. You may be tired of hearing about so many dinosaurs, but to truly grasp the idea that this was one of their golden ages, we can't forget the most abundant dinosaurs of all, sauropods. In fact, 150 million years ago was likely the apex period for this group. Sauropods were typically the most common dinosaurs around, with Camarasaurus holding the title of the most abundant animal in the Western Hemisphere. But it wasn't alone. A mix of different sauropod families roamed the Earth, with two key players dominating the scene: the Diplodocids and the Macronarians. Both were powerhouses with multiple iconic members. Some of these included household names like Brachiosaurus, Dioicus, Supersaurus, Barosaurus, Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, and an honorable mention, Marranosaurus. Though it didn't belong to either family, Marranosaurus was absolutely massive. In fact, nearly every sauropod alive during this time, whether mentioned or not, was pretty huge, with the smallest weighing in at 13 tons, while the largest could tip the scales at around 70 tons. Naturally, with such a crazy variety of fauna roaming the Earth, many have been amazed by the Morrison Formation since its discovery, but interestingly, it wasn't all that unique. In fact, much of the world had similar ecosystems where the same groups of dinosaurs dominated. In some places, you could even find the exact same species. For example, if you tried to escape the Allosaurus, Catosaurus, or Torvosaurus by fleeing to Europe, you'd still run into them. But, on the flip side, if you traveled to Gondwana, you'd be treated to some amazing sauropod sightings. Fossil evidence of Brachiosaurus, Barosaurus, and Camarasaurus has been found there, along with dinosaurs unique to those distant lands. The same trends that were seen in the Morrison Formation were still evident in other parts of the world, with many dinosaurs having counterparts across the globe. For instance, Tanzania had a titanic Giraffatitan, which played a very similar ecological role to Brachiosaurus. But that's not all. Tanzania was also home to Centaurus, a stegosaur that was essentially a counterpart and close relative of Stegosaurus in Europe. This kind of scenario was repeated with sauropods like the Oceansaurus and stegosaurs like Kuros, which peppered the land. What set the Gondwana in Europe apart, however, was the appearance of a new kind of theropod family that hadn't been seen in North America, or anywhere else, for that matter. This was the Carcharodontosauridae family, which was partially characterized by high neural spines, proportionally long arms, and long, narrow skulls. The first to evolve within this family was the Vetera prosauropods, oddly enough in China. Not far from Europe, Carcharodontosaurs weren't the only predators roaming. Asia had its own unique apex predator, the Yingtuanosaurus. Following the trend, this was a monstrous theropod nearly as long as the largest Torvosaurus, weighing up to 3.4 tons, which made it the largest predator in all of Asia. From a distance, you might mistake it for a giant Allosaurus, as the two were closely related and shared many features. But despite the similarities, they weren't cut from the same cloth. The Yingtuanosaurus wasn't an allosaur. It was a matriacanthosaur, which in Greek means moderately spined lizards. So it's not surprising that this group's defining trait was, well, moderately sized spines. The uniqueness of young Tyrannosaurus aside, Asia, like the rest of the world, was dominated by the four main dinosaur groups, each with multiple species reigning supreme. Some of the most well-known dinosaurs from that time included Mimisaurus, Jinchanosaurus, Dinosaurus, and Leosaurus. But it wasn't just the dinosaurs that would have left your eyes wide open. The late Jurassic was also home to a wide range of non-dinosaurs, with one of the most dominant being crocodilian forms. Like dinosaurs, they came in a variety of sizes and inhabited a range of habitats, but most were on the smaller side, like the gator-sized otis, which was semi-aquatic, hunting fish, amphibians, and turtles near the water. However, a few were fully terrestrial and could look downright nightmarish, such as Halap, with its slender, skinny limbs giving it an unsettling appearance. But you wouldn't need to worry about Halap, as it was a tiny creature, rarely growing taller than a boot, and mostly sticking to insects and other small prey. The other terrestrial crocs were small too, likely a result of living in the shadow of dinosaurs. In this chaotic ecosystem, our very own ancestors, the mammalia forms, were also a part of the mix. By this time, they had been around for over 100 million years and were well adapted to a variety of lifestyles. Some older fossils show that they developed the ability to glide, climb trees, and even be semi-aquatic. Their diets were just as versatile, with some species specializing in plants, while others nibbled on meat or dabbled in both, like the omnivorous Geomarodon, who may have even scavenged on dinosaurs. Yet, despite all these remarkable adaptations, mammalia forms were still small, on average, no bigger than a shrew, making them hard to notice among the titans. There was a group that wasn't exactly giant, but they were hard to miss: the pterosaurs. These flying reptiles had ruled the skies roughly 80 million years before this point, flying mostly unchallenged. Interestingly, though, they weren't very populous, with only a few remains from the time known. However, their bones were geologically widespread, suggesting that they had successfully conquered a significant portion of the Earth. Typically, late Jurassic pterosaurs seemed to prefer marine and shoreline habitats, where they could feast on fish, insects, shellfish, and carrion. It's also been suggested that the largest pterosaurs could have actively hunted certain terrestrial creatures, with the biggest of them being quite the apex predator. The pterosaur Lucis lived in Europe and was a true leviathan compared to its coexisting relatives. With an estimated wingspan of 6 meters, 12 feet, Lucis was a formidable predator. Its sharp, straight teeth could have made it capable of hunting other pterosaurs, especially considering that most of its kin were less than half its size. As the king of the skies, Lucis didn't have much to worry about, though it wasn't entirely alone. Alongside pterosaurs, bird-like dinosaurs had managed to take flight as well. Back in the day, these flying dinosaurs were still a novelty and extremely rare, with only one kind known from that era: the Archaeopteryx. This dinosaur is monumental to paleontology, as it is the earliest known dinosaur capable of powered flight. There are other contenders for this title, some dating back to 165 million years ago. But many paleontologists still argue over the classification of these older creatures. The Archaeopteryx would have used its flying abilities to hunt small prey, including reptiles and insects, and to escape predators. It was a tiny fellow, similar in size to a modern-day magpie. With so much life around you, this tiny flyer would have had to be quick and nimble to survive in the fierce competition for resources. Above you, you probably won't be surprised to know that the waters were home to many terrifying creatures as well. The major difference between land and sea creatures was that, while many animals on land were wondrous, The oceans and seas were home to pure nightmares. One of the most terrifying of these was the plesiosaur. These marine reptiles had flat bodies, short tails, and 4 flippers. They were also cosmopolitan, meaning they could be found all over the world. Plesiosaurs came in various sizes, and many were apex predators, with some of the largest and most terrifying creatures ruling the seas. The pliosaur family, often overshadowed by their more famous cousins, the plesiosaurs, were even more terrifying. While we commonly imagine plesiosaurs with long, narrow necks, pliosaurs had short necks and massive skulls filled with sharp, conical teeth, perfect for hunting down medium and large-sized prey. You've probably heard of the most famous one, the Liopleurodon, but it had actually been dead for 5 million years by the time the late Jurassic rolled around. Don't worry, though, this period found an even bigger, more terrifying replacement, the Pliosaurus. Adults of this Pliosaurus species were among the largest ever recorded, reaching lengths of up to 10 meters, 33 feet, and weighing around 5 tons. With such immense size, they easily killed whatever they could catch, including what we consider the jaws of the modern oceans, sharks. Now, this isn't to say sharks were pushovers back then. They weren't, but they were no pliosaur, and certainly didn't come close in size. Sharks would still have been a problem for smaller animals, including fish, and another famous staple of Mesozoic oceans. The pliosaur, which had been the true giants for millions of years during the Triassic and early Jurassic, experienced a significant decline in size during these later periods. This decline was mainly due to the rise of the plesiosaurs. However, the battle wasn't one-sided. The shallow seas and open oceans still had plenty of different pliosaur species that filled various niches, and some could grow up to 7 meters, 23 feet, long, which is wild when you consider that Triassic pliosaur could sometimes be almost 4 times bigger. That size would have made them absolutely horrifying, to say the least. Ultimately, Machimosaurus and the other marine crocodiles were some of the most terrifying predators of their time. But here's the catch. They weren't the only apex predators lurking in the waters. If you thought the seas were bad, imagine trying to navigate a world filled with predators in the sky, on land, and in the oceans. The late Jurassic was truly a time when everything seemed to be out to get you. And yet, despite all these dangers, Earth 150 million years ago still managed to host an incredibly rich diversity of life. If you think that was intense, imagine what other mysteries might be lurking in the depths of time. But before you start time traveling, I've got more prehistoric creatures to share with you. Want to learn more? Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, hit the notification bell, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. Until next time, stay curious.